Welcome back. It's the Big Blue Banter, New York Giants football podcast. I'm Dan Schneider, joined as always my co-host Nick Filato. Today we were to do a little bit of an update. We've been seeing a report or reports from Paul Schwartz, who's a longtime beat writer for the Giants. And I've mentioned in the past, and I'll mention it again. When it comes to Giants beat reporters that are left on the beat, it's Schwartz and it's Vacchiano for me as far as reports that I trust, in the sense that I think they have actual sources in the building. The reporting has been really accurate versus the rest of the beat over time. And that's not to knock the rest of the beat. These days, I've mentioned this in the past, and I'll mention it again. It's really hard to get anything out of players these days. They're much more well-guarded. They have agents. They have publicists. They have people telling them not to give any information away. And in the building, the Giants are operating under a different system now with Joe Schoen. They're not giving away as much information as they had in the past. So things aren't always going to get out, but Paul Schwartz has been pretty accurate, far more than anyone else, and so is Ralph Vacchiano. And there are two reports that there was a report that Schwartz had both on Daniel Jones' contract negotiation and Saquon Barkley's contract negotiation recently, so we're going to get into that today. Also, Dan Duggan had an interesting article, I thought, in The Athletic, which kind of speculated a bit on the comments Joe Schoen has made both on the Daniel Jones contract negotiations and the Saquon Barkley contract negotiations in his post-bye or during his bye week presser that he had for the Giants, and then what he said after the season and how different they were. So we're going to talk a little bit about both of those things. We're going to get into all of that today. But Nick, before we do that, how are you doing today, my friend?
I am excellent, Dan. We are in the speculation part of the season. The Senior Bowl and East-West Shrine game is going on. I'm really excited to kick into draft profiles, which we will be doing shortly here on the Big Blue Banter podcast. I'm starting to get really knee-deep into the NFL draft, Dan, and I'm quite excited about it.
Yeah, the draft's the most fun part of the year. But before we get to any of the draft, we do have to take care of the business when it comes to the Giants, and that's all of their contract negotiations, all of these free agents, and what's going to happen in free agency. So let's start with these reports from Paul Schwartz. So the first one is, we'll start with the one on Saquon Barkley. So actually, we can get first to what Joe Schoen said at the combine, or not the combine, at the Senior Bowl this week when he was asked about these two upcoming contracts. And he said, "We are not currently engaging in any contract negotiations with Daniel Jones, but he reiterated that we want him back as our quarterback." And then on the Barkley front, did you catch what he said on Saquon Barkley? I didn't catch exactly what he said on Saquon Barkley, but I believe he said we're still in negotiations there.
They are in negotiations there is essentially the essence of what he was saying. And one reason why I think that's the case, Dan, and I could be speculating here, is that, but I think it makes sense. Joe Schoen has a number for Saquon Barkley that he will not budge on. And I think that number is a firm set of number. And I think a firm number. And I think Joe Schoen is probably going to operate like this for a lot of free agents. Obviously, quarterback position is a little bit more different, but 12.5 is a number that I've seen float around Twitter a lot. And that's the number that I feel like makes a lot of sense if you want to retain someone like Saquon Barkley. It's similar contract to Joe Mixon and Nick Chubb, but apparently, I think it was reported that he denied or he didn't accept a deal that was somewhat akin to that during the season. Was that something that was reported and validated, Dan?
Well, they did talk about how they got into contract negotiations with Saquon Barkley, and we'll talk a little bit about that later when it comes to Jones. During the season, they didn't do that with Daniel Jones. Those negotiations were tabled. Essentially, both sides couldn't come to anywhere near an agreement and put toward the offseason. And we'll get into that now, actually, because that's part of the report. Part of the report from Paul Schwartz was, he said, and this is a quote from Schwartz's article, he said, "If Barkley is seeking anything close to the $16 million per year deal that Christian McCaffrey is making, a deal will not get done. The Giants do not seem inclined to move much higher than their $12.5 million per year offer." So it seems to me like the Giants are playing a little bit of hardball here with the Saquon Barkley negotiations. And this is interesting, too, because of what Dan Duggan kind of wrote in his article that I thought was very interesting. He said it's really a change of tone. Joe Schoen during the bye week was talking about how, we are negotiating with Saquon Barkley, want to get something done with Saquon Barkley. And when it came to Daniel Jones, Joe Schoen said, we're still in the evaluation period with Daniel Jones. It was very much so. We like Saquon Barkley. We know what he is. We want to negotiate. We want to get a deal done. And on Jones, it was, we still need to see more. Now it's, we're going to re-sign Jones. We want to re-sign Jones. Don't worry. We haven't started negotiations yet, but we're going to get this thing done. And with Barkley, it's like, well, I don't know. Are we going to get this thing done? We have a number in mind. It's very far off from the number that Saquon reportedly wants, which is that $16 million per year offer. 12.5 and 16 are nowhere near each other, really, when you're looking at a per year thing. That's, if you're signing a 3-year deal, that's 12 million. If you're signing a 4-year deal, that's 16 million. That's a lot of guaranteed money differences as well. So things have changed. And I thought what was interesting about that, Nick, is the tone changed. And this is what Duggan also brought up as well, as the offense kind of changed, right? Like during that bye week when he had that presser, the Giants offense ran entirely through Saquon Barkley. They really had they got a few things done in the passing game, but most of it was based off of play action of Barkley, roll out to your right or roll out to your left, dump it down to a tight end, hit the tight end outside, but it's still basically just an easy, quick read. And then after the bye week, not really after the bye week, but over the last 4 or 5 games of the season, they said, let's see what happens. And when we trust Daniel Jones to run this offense through him, and we even had a game where the Giants won and put up 31 points, and Saquon Barkley had 9 carries in that Vikings game. And I think that might have been a very telling game for Joe Schoen here and for the Giants as they move forward, because this is an incredibly difficult decision, I think, just from the standpoint of what it means to the lot, like the human side to this whole thing, right? I think if there was no human element to this, and there was no locker room element to this, and there was no leadership element to this, and there was no John Mara element to this, and fan base element to this, Joe Schoen wouldn't re-sign Saquon Barkley, and it wouldn't even really be much of a thought for him, in my personal opinion. I don't think Joe Schoen's the type of guy that wants to commit big money to a second running back contract. But I think that human element, Nick, and all of that factors in here. I really do believe that, because you are telling a team that just got to the playoffs. And you even saw, like the other day, I posted something, Nick. I don't know if you saw this, but I posted just a question, really. I mean, it wasn't me making my point. People can say, it's alluding to something. But my question, Nick, was like, is there any risk behind signing a second running back contract? And I outline all the risk behind signing Saquon Barkley a second contract. Obviously, the O-line still is king here, all those things. And Darius Slayton quote tweeted me, was like, are you crazy, man? You think you can get this kind of production out of day 3 backs and things of that nature, which is not the point I was trying to make at all. But the point I'm trying to make with saying that is, that's the locker room right there, right? That's the teammates. That's the guys who, in their mind, they're like, Saquon Barkley's everything to this team. He was the reason why we did what we did. And they're not thinking like, oh, running backs fall off at age 26. They're not thinking like, oh, the history of giving second running backs contract is brutally bad. None of that goes through any of their mind. But at the same time, for Joe Schoen, he has to consider, what do I tell my team? What do I tell the locker room if I do say we can move on from Saquon Barkley and go from there?
It's an interesting point. And no, I did not see that from Darius Slayton. I find that to be hilarious. But I was just going to ask, Dan, maybe we can just get a hold of next year's script to see if Saquon Barkley is actually on the roster.
Oh, yeah, we can check out the script for next year, right? I don't know if we're going to get our hands on the script. I think they only hand it out to the players, but no, man, I can't even get into all that, because that stuff to me is so funny. I had a friend today ask me, who's not as really into football, but like just sees things going on. He asked me, did you see, like, he asked me my thoughts and if I saw the whole script thing. I was like, no, man, like that's not like the NFL is a $10 billion. Now it's over $10 billion in revenue business. It's basically one of the only good industries we have left in this country, which is crazy that we've gotten to this point. It's like, it reminds me of Frank Sabaka in season 2 of The Wire. This is not a spoiler, Nick, so don't worry, and it's fine. Don't worry. This is not a spoiler. You're just going to have to hear this because this is not a spoiler. But he said, we used to build things in this country. Now all we do is put our hands in the pockets of the next person and the next person. And he's right. Like, we don't build anything. What do we have as an industry in this country? I don't know. I don't want to get into that kind of discussion right now. But somehow the NFL is one of our biggest industries in the country. So a $10 billion revenue industry is not going to risk everything by fixing it with a script.
Kind of make it clear to the people who aren't on Twitter. So Arian Foster on the podcast with someone from Barstool,
PFT
PFT comments,
the biggest troll on the internet.
Yeah, he's a huge troll. He sarcastically said that the NFL was scripted, only the conversation made it seem like it was something that was true. And it was an obvious joke by some of the stuff he was saying. But I don't think a lot of people watched it and they just saw the headlines and people actually believed that the NFL was scripted and that Arian Foster was kind of giving away the big secret. And it was entertaining. But back to Saquon Barkley and Daniel Jones, man. I can totally understand what Darius Slayton is saying. I think Saquon Barkley is very valuable to this locker room. I still think he's a very valuable player who can still be a true impact player here for the Giants moving forward if he can stay healthy, right? But you have to weigh in the cost. What is essentially his long-term contract or whatever you sign him to, how that's going to impact you with the future contracts you're going to sign with the Dexter Lawrences of the world, with the Andrew Thomases of the world, the Xavier McKinneys, right? So That is where I think you were coming from. And I'm okay with 12.5. Look, if they let him walk, I think I'm okay either way. I think you're in the same boat. Ideally, I think you would rather pursue, maybe, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you would rather go in another direction at the running back position. Me, if Saquon Barkley is back, I will be okay with it. If the Giants do opt to let him walk, if he is asking for 16 million, which is almost resetting the running back market because Christian McCaffrey only makes a smidge more than that. If the Giants do allow him to walk, I think I'll be fine. So I'm kind of just on the ship of like whatever Joe Schoen does, I will be okay with. But I do think you can't just replace Saquon Barkley with a third round back or something like that. I think he has more value than that. It just always comes down to the cost, right? Because that's what this is all about. The cap is a real thing. I know it can be maneuvered, as we've said several times on the podcast, but it is a real thing, and you have to be judicious with how you allocate your money moving forward when you have a lot of young players that you're going to pay.
Right. And as far as there's a lot to address there, but I just want to touch on something you said in the back end. As far as manipulating the cap in the way that people like Howie Roseman are doing with the Eagles, with all those prorated contracts and the void years, you really shouldn't. You shouldn't, and Giants won't be doing any of that until they're in their Super Bowl window. When you're in your Super Bowl window, that's when you start doing that kind of thing. And Joe Schoen's already made it clear, I want to keep us in cap health. That's not cap health. That's the opposite. And that's fine, because I still think you're getting an advantage the way they run it. But there's no point in doing that until you get into that Super Bowl window. Why? Well, we just saw what happens when you can do that outside the Super Bowl window. Dave Gettleman did that outside of a real Super Bowl window. Maybe in his mind, we were in a Super Bowl window somehow last year in 2021. But the reality was the Giants were not. And now they're paying the price for it. They paid the price for it this year. They're going to pay for the last year. They're going to pay the price for it in 2023 as well. As far as the Barkley situation goes, I'm not totally against re-signing Barkley, and it's not. I'm kind of on the border here. I could go either way here because there's a lot of factors, and I put that in the tweet under the Slate where Slate quote tweeted me in my second reply. It's like I'm just outlining one side of the case. There's also the other side of the case. The other side of the case is, look, he's still their best and most explosive skill player. And not only that, if you look across the NFL and you look at some of the contracts that these receivers are signing, you could look at it and say, well, if I'm going to pay $15 million a year, $18 million a year for Christian Kirk, why not just pay $16 million a year for Saquon Barkley, right? And in that sense, it makes a lot of sense from that standpoint. It's like, we should definitely re-sign Barkley, right? He's obviously a more explosive and better impact player than Christian Kirk. But unfortunately, the replacement level for Kirk, the Richie James of the world, or whoever, let's not even say the Richie James of the world. Let's say like a 4th or 5th round receiver who played this year. Like, I don't know, like a Khalil Shakir, who played for the Bills in the playoff game a little bit. A Khalil Shakir is not making the same kind of impact that a Dameon Pierce is making. It's not making the same kind of impact that a Khalil Herbert is making. And now you can even look at the UDFA free agent running backs who have hit as well over the years. And then you're like, okay, I can see where we're going there. And the Saquon Barkley discussion for me, the con side of it, Nick, has never been about what will Saquon Barkley do in 2023. I think there's a good chance he stays healthy and has a great 2023. It's all about what will happen in 2024 and 2025 and 2026, or if you give a 4-year deal, when there's guaranteed money that you still have on the books in those years, and you're thinking about it and you're like, wait a second, is he still effective at that point? Is he gotten injured again? Is he becoming the big outlier? Because we know age 26 and a half is when these guys really tend to fall off. There are outliers. There's not many, but there are outliers. So that's what the Barkley discussion is not really about the now for me. It's all about the future. And I am still fine with them signing him for the reason I outlined mostly above, which is, look, you have to pay like Jacoby Myers. Someone's going to pay Jacoby Myers $12 million a year or something like that, right? Like Saquon Barkley is a much better player to me. And someone even asked me, should the Giants recently in replies, someone asked me, like, should the Giants just let Barkley walk and use that money on Jacoby Myers? And I thought about that. And I'm like, no, I don't want Jacoby. Like, I get it. I understand where they're coming from, because you can replace Barkley. And I'm not saying you replace him with 1 day 3 back. You can go 2 day 3 backs, or you could go a day 2 and a day 3. Look at who's going on day 2. Kenneth Walker went on day 2, right? Like DeAndre Swift, there's tons of amazing. Jonathan Taylor was a day 2 back. Day 2 might be the range for a running back. For me, it's not even about using high capital, where you're going to use it. It's all about, like, do you sign him to that second contract? That's where the risk comes into play. It's always the second contract, which is always why Nick and I know you agree with me. That's why I'm assuming you agree with this, because we've already discussed this. Why we've always said, like, don't use that second pick on a running back when you know that you're already kind of setting yourself up for failure, because you can't really mathematically sign him to a second contract, or not mathematically, you can't logically sign him to that second contract and feel good about that at any point. So with Barkley, it is about that. And I think that's why Joe Schoen is where he's at, where he's like, we're at 12.5. That's the amount we want to allocate to this position on a second deal. And we're not going to move too far off of that no matter who it is.
I mean, I think that's a completely fair assessment of the situation. Now, I also think, as I'm sure people are listening, they're like, well, I want Saquon Barkley back. I think that's fair too. I think you got to try to convince Saquon Barkley to come back on that deal. If he's going to get paid more than that from another team, look, man, that sucks. I love Saquon Barkley. This is a economical game. You need to be smart with your money. And as we've said, there are a lot of assets on this roster that are going to be coming up for possible position leading type of deals. Like Andrew Thomas might reset the market. Dexter Lawrence might reset the market. I don't know if Xavier McKinney will, depending on if he's eligible now to re-sign. I don't know if he will after breaking his hand in Cabo. We might want to wait it out because he might get a bigger deal next offseason. But we'll have to wait and see exactly how that transpires. But what about Daniel Jones, man? What's the word about Daniel Jones right now? It doesn't appear like Joe Schoen has initiated conversations yet with his representatives, I think is what he said, according to Paul Schwartz down at the Senior Bowl. But that's coming soon because it really does seem like not certain, but it's near certain that Daniel Jones will be back and be the quarterback for the Giants.
Yeah, I want to touch one more thing on Barkley before we wrap up, then we'll get into some Jones. I think the fact of the matter is this. Look, if the Giants play hardball with Barkley, like this report is suggesting, and they say, look, we have $12.5 million, he's not going to accept that. I don't think he's going to come to us, the Giants, at any point and be like, you know what, I changed my mind. We're going to do that because he has an agent and he wants to get paid.
Yeah.
And so he will hit the market. And at that point, I don't think it's a maybe. I think it will happen. Someone's going to offer him a much bigger deal than the Giants are going to offer him, probably close to that 14, 15, $16 million per year he wants. And he'll have to make the decision at that point. Is it worth staying with the Giants where I want to end my career back in that locker room where I love people? Or am I going to take the money and go to a different place? Because they're not going to have to allocate $36 million to the quarterback position per year like the Giants are about to do with Daniel Jones. That's the difference right there, right? If you're Trevor Lawrence and the Jaguars, can you offer Saquon Barkley a $60 million contract knowing that you don't have to pay Trevor Lawrence for a long time? That's 35 mil. That's about probably 28. I don't know. I think the rookie scale is probably like 8 million a year. I think if just from memory, I think it's about, what'd you say?
It's around there, yeah.
It's around 8 million per year that they're going to allocate to Trevor Lawrence, those types of quarterbacks. So 8 million versus the 36 Daniel's probably going to get, or let's say it's 35 that Daniel's probably going to get. That's 27 million per year in cap space more that these types of teams have to spend on a Saquon Barkley type asset than the Giants have, right? So in that sense, it doesn't really matter to them if they're giving 16 or 12 or 13 or 14 to Barkley. They have the money to burn. The Giants, once they re-sign Jones, do they have that money to burn? That's always been the question with this whole Barkley situation, right? We're not really that team that has the rookie contract. We're done with our rookie contract at quarterback. It's over with. Say goodbye to it. We're done. We had that break. We had the years of doing it. Gettleman went all in with the Galladays and the Rudolphs and all the crap that he brought onto this roster that didn't help us and only made us worse and only hurt our cap situation. Those teams, and I don't know, I haven't thought about all of them, Nick, but I'm trying to think of other teams that come to mind. The Jaguars came right to mind, right? Like if you put Barkley on that team, I think that's a good ad for Doug Peterson right now in the Trevor Lawrence window personally. ETN's all right. I'm not a huge fan of ETN. Barkley, remember some of those power gap runs we saw against the Giants that ETN was like picking the wrong hole. I could just see Barkley doing really well there in that situation. No state tax as well could impact the decision. Well, Miami's another example of that, right? They have Tua in the rookie contract window. They don't really have a running back right now on that roster. Can you imagine Barkley signing there too? So there will be teams that come out and say, we can offer him a lot more money because we don't have to pay the quarterback. And that's the big thing with the Barkley situation. That's what's making it tough for Joe Schoen. That's what's making it tough for the Barkley to come to the same term as the Giants. And that's what's going to make things really tough for him to actually be re-signed if they stay with this stance that they have right now, according to Paul Schwartz, which is we want 12.5, you want 16, hit the market, come back to us. If he hits the market, I don't know that he's coming back.
Yeah, if he hits the market, that's where it's going to get interesting because I think you're right. Someone's going to offer more than 12.5. And I know we're on a tight schedule here, so we should probably get into Daniel Jones. So what is the latest news on Daniel Jones, and what are your opinions as to what I referenced a little bit before? It almost seems certain that he's going to be back as the Giants quarterback.
Yeah, it seems certain, but to some extent, but I'm not so I feel like it's certain based on what Joe Schoen has said. And I think the certainty could come down to the fact that at worst they'll franchise tag him. I think that's where this is leading to, a franchise tag, and then maybe and they'll obviously not maybe, they'll discuss and hopefully come to terms with a deal. But according to Paul Schwartz, and again, I do take his opinions on the Giants from source. I feel like he's very well sourced. He says they're looking at a 5-year contract for Daniel Jones that they feel is ideal for the team because it would allow them to spread the bonus money across the maximum years allowed, which would decrease his cap hit in 2023. And that number that he's floating is in the $35 million per year range.
$35 million, if I'm not mistaken, that is going to be north of Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins makes 35. And I think he has a point too. Like, he defeated Kirk Cousins in the playoffs. He might not have had the passing stats that Cousins had during the season, but that's definitely something that his representatives can lean on and be like, look, what Kirk Cousins is making this. Jared Goff makes around that type of money. Carson Wentz makes an enormous amount of money for his skill set. He makes $32 million a year. The franchise tag is what, 32.5? I'm imagining if the Giants do sign him to that 5-year deal and do not franchise tag him, he's going to ask for more than that. You're talking about probably a little bit more than 34, 35, somewhere around that range. It's just, are you comfortable giving that to a quarterback who was written off last offseason and Brian Daboll helped revitalize his career? That's the real conversation with Daniel Jones. Now, in terms of the 5-year deal, Dan, I think a lot of contracts right now are constructed to where the teams can get out of them after 2 years. So I really think this would end up being more like a 2-year deal that the Giants can get out of without a huge burden on them after about 2 seasons.
So a few things on that. I'll first start by saying with the Cousins aspect of it and in that range of quarterback, the only thing that comes to my mind is it's so tough with these contracts because one, there's a market price for these quarterbacks, right? Like, it's already been determined based on all these other contracts. 2, we just had 2 massive F-ups in the NFL, the Murray contract and the Kyler contract and the Deshaun Watson contract. And they've really screwed up the entire landscape of this whole thing. They've made it impossible to come to any kind of logical, reasonable deals with these quarterbacks. You have to overpay every single one or you're not going to get them back because the market has dictated that. That's the price. There's no budging. There's no room to budge here. So we start with that and we understand that's why he wants a deal in that range. But what you just described, Nick, ideally, that's what I would hope would happen. But what this report is not telling me that. This report is telling me a 5-year deal that allows them to spread the bonus money across the maximum years allowed. If you're spreading the bonus money across the maximum years allowed, you do not have an out to get out of that contract. You're pushing that dead cap you're spreading the dead cap all the way. I don't want to call it dead cap because they're not going to cut it. But if you were to want to cut Daniel Jones, if things don't work out and it turns out, well, his 1 year of the NFL of the 4 years was good. The other 3 were bad. And that's the quarterback. It's not this new one. If that ends up happening, and I don't think that's going to happen, I hope not, because that would suck for us. But if that ends up happening, now you will have less of a chance to get out of that contract because you're pushing the cap, you're pushing the bonus money across the entirety of the contract. Doesn't mean you can't get out of it, right? It will mean like this, like year 4, year 5, there'll be some bonus money. They'll take a big dead cap hit if they want to move him, cut him, trade him, anything like that. Because even if you trade him, you're still on the hook for some of that bonus money. So that's what's interesting to me. A 5-year deal in the $35 million range, which would put them at, I don't know, a little bit over about 175. That would be. Now, the big number would be if you're doing 5 years, 175 million, let's say, for example. And that was quick math in my head. I think that's right. Let's see. 35, 70, 140 plus another 35. So 175. I think I nailed that one. So 5 years, 175, right?
Poker player.
With bonus money, I was just lucky. With bonus, my math is horrible. With bonus money that's spread across the maximum years allowed, according to Schwartz, 2 decreases cap hit for 2023. That's again, so they have room to budge this year, so they're not, in a spot like they were this year where they're so tight against the cap they can barely call up their practice squad players. They can't sign Linville Joseph in season despite having no defensive line depth. They're stuck at linebacker. All the things we saw this season from the Giants. They don't want to do that ever again, obviously. So they decrease the cap hit. They spread the bonus money across the years. Now it will come down to how much guaranteed money you're going to give Daniel Jones. The more you see in that guaranteed, so it's 5 years, 75. If that's like the Kyler Murray or the Deshaun Watson contract or the Kirk Cousins contract, for example, by the way, which was like all guaranteed. That was the first deal of that, which is why the Vikings have been in the situation where they haven't been able to get out of that contract, even though some people think they might kind of want to and move on. They can't. All they can do is keep pushing it back, prorating it, kicking the can, because it's the only way they can even field the roster essentially that they want, like that can be competitive. At some point, that's going to come back to bite the Vikings. And now that's the question with the Giants, right? Like if you do that 5-year 175 and it's like 125 of it is guaranteed or something like that. Now you're not going to have that 2-year out, Nick, because you have already put so much bonus money into this, so much guaranteed, and you're spreading the money across the max years allowed. So a lot of that is kicking in later in the contract.
Thing about Kirk Cousins, he resigned, I believe, an extension, a 1-year extension in 2022 going into the season, which was also fully guaranteed. It was like $35 million fully guaranteed just for that extra year.
And I think they added a void year to that, by the way.
Yeah, they did. Yes. It's interesting with the Daniel Jones thing. Like I don't fully know exactly how the cap works in terms of what the Giants could do to get out of that deal. But you're right, man, because that's the point of giving him the 5-year deal, so you can spread it out so it's not such an exorbitant cap hit in 2023. I just don't know if Joe Schoen would want to. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't seem like Joe Schoen would be the type of general manager so far that would want to lock himself into a quarterback that long, though. That's where I'm like, there are a lot of ways you can maneuver the cap. That's where I'm just a little bit curious as to, it doesn't make full sense to me that he would want to just give a 5-year deal to Daniel Jones if there wasn't a way he could get out of it after a couple seasons.
But that's that, and I know what you're saying, but that's the tough spot he's in, right? Because either you do what you just said, right? Like you don't give him that 5-year deal and spread the money back to the end because you want to have that 2-year out in case he doesn't work out and in case the development doesn't go the way you want it to. But at the same time, if you do it that way, then you're putting most of the cap hit in the early years, and that doesn't allow you to, it's a catch-22, right? Because that doesn't allow you then to have cap space to build the roster and give him the talent around him that he quote unquote needs to get better. So it's the toughest spot for the GM. On one hand, you're like, yeah, Joe Schoen, he wants to be a little bit more sure before he puts all this guaranteed money into a quarterback, spreads it over 5 years. I get that. But at the same time, if he does take that time to be more sure, like you said, give himself a 2-year out, well, then he's not going to have much cap space to help Daniel Jones right now and put a receiver around him, trade for a receiver, re-sign him, or sign a receiver, or put an offensive line, or whatever it's going to be to make his team better, linebacker, corner, we all know the holes the Giants have on this roster right now. So that's the total catch-22. Either you go all in on Daniel Jones and you say, let's just do this thing, right? Let's give him a low cap hit for 2023, a 5-year deal. A ton of the guaranteed money is on the back end of that contract, and we just load the roster up with talent around him. We say, F it, let's do this thing. And then we might be effed, and then we might be screwed in the future. Or you say, I'm not so sure. And then you kind of give him the deal where most of the money's up front, and in 2 or 3 years, there's not much guaranteed money left. So if it didn't work out, we can cut him and move on. But then if you do that, what did you put around him, right? So then the question will always be with Giants fans, well, you didn't really give him the receivers he needed. Well, you didn't really give him the offensive line he needed. So we still don't really know in 2 years, even if Joe Schoen in his mind thinks he does know. So it's a very tricky situation on the Jones front. The Barkley one's very cut and dry to me. I don't think if they let him test that market, he's coming back to the Giants. So either they're going to get to a deal and they're going to go closer to the $16 million that Barkley wants, or Barkley's going to hit the market. The Jags, the Dolphins, any of these teams, the rookie contract at quarterback are going to give him the $16 million, and that's just going to be it for him. The Jones one's really tricky because it's either you go all in or you do what, and you go, and that's basically what Schwartz is suggesting, right? If they spread that money across, decrease his cap hit in 2023, like he's saying, that's the all-in strategy. We want the cap space now. We want to put talent around Jones, and that's fine, and that's what it is. But it's a very interesting spot, I think.
Is that a speculation from Schwartz, or is that something that someone told him?
I think it's based on what he's hearing, type of thing. Like he has his sources, and that's what the read I got from it. But it's not like he's a source. It's not source reporting or anything like that.
Exactly. So it's not even 100% certain, because I still think there's a world where the Giants their best course of action could be even like a franchise tag on Daniel Jones, and then figure it out.
Jones, to be honest.
Yeah, tag Jones, be like, okay, $32.5 million this year. We'll figure that out, and then maybe we can work on a deal moving forward, depending on whatever variable happens throughout free agency, throughout the draft, or what have you. I also think the Giants, it would behoove them to re-sign Andrew Thomas right now during this offseason, right? Mm-hmm. Dexter Lawrence too. He's playing on that 5th-year option. You can re-sign him. These long-term pieces, re-sign them now, because if you re-sign them next year, then that market's just going to be higher, right? Like we see a lot of smart teams. The Eagles do stuff like this. We've seen a lot of teams. I think the Ravens have done stuff like this as well. So a lot of front offices that are pretty smart gotten ahead of it in terms of re-signing the talent that they know they want to be building blocks on that team. And the Giants have several of those players. That is a great place to be in, because it's not a situation the Giants have been in for quite a while. so much talent just walk right out the door, Dan, in the past. Right now, we're talking about guys that Dave Gettleman drafted that are going to be huge cogs, huge, important impact players on this roster for Joe Schoen moving forward. But it's going to come at a price. And that's why another variable as to why these contracts, specifically with Daniel Jones and even Saquon Barkley, even though I think I'm right there with you, they're not going to nudge off that 12.5 or whatever the number is. But specifically with Daniel Jones, I think that's another reason why this gets so damn complicated.
Yeah, it does. And the good news about that is, as you mentioned, not only are they cornerstone guys, they're young, they were drafted by us, they're also in the trenches. You and I both believe this game is won in the trenches, football. So we got two trench players that are going to reset the market. Andrew Thomas, probably going to be the highest paid left tackle in the NFL, in my opinion. That's my guess there. Dexter Lawrence, I don't see how he wouldn't be the highest paid defensive tackle either. I mean, you look at the numbers from this year.
Yeah, Aaron Donald gets like 31. That's his
I think
AAV.
he'll probably get like the 30. Ooh. Look at what they gave Leonard Williams, right? Like, he's a much better player than Leonard Williams was when the Giants re-signed Leonard Williams. Much better player than Leonard Williams. So there's no way in my mind that he doesn't get that kind of deal, and we'll see what happens. But the fact of the matter is, if you're going 30 there and you're going 20 whatever on Andrew Thomas and you're going 35 on Jones, where's the money for Barkley, right? Where's the money for any of this? And that's probably why Schwartz is speculating or reporting what he's reporting, that the Giants are going to go this route. Because if that's the case, you kind of have to go all in on Jones and spread that bonus money across the max years, because you got to get a low cap hit on that quarterback early so you can actually afford Dexter Lawrence and Andrew Thomas and Saquon Barkley and whatever else it would be.
The one thing I will say about Leonard Williams' contract, the AAV on that is 21. That's about 10 million less. It's just they spread that shit out and they backloaded it like crazy.
Yeah,
so
now
he's getting paid.
Maybe he'll be like 25
million. Yeah, I think that's about 5 million more than Chris Jones. I think Chris Jones' AAV is about 20. So I think like maybe, so that's where I'm looking. I'm looking at like 22 and a half, 23.
Yeah.
Something like that. Because Chris Jones, there's going to come a time when Dexter Lawrence signs that contract. Chris Jones is going to be like, excuse me, especially if they win the Super Bowl this year. You know, he's going to definitely be looking for a new contract to reset whatever Dexter gets.
Right. That's a good point. So maybe a 30 was definitely too high on that. I don't know. Aaron Donald got a very big contract, I guess. I didn't know he was that much more than Chris Jones. But yeah, that's a good point there. Maybe thinking in the 23. But even if it's a 23 range for him, and I don't know what Andrew Thomas will make, because I haven't looked at left tackle contracts in a while, but I'm sure it's up there. That's still, those are 4 huge chunks of your salary right there. Jones, Barkley. You don't really, you kind of have to do what Schwartz is suggesting again, and spread that bonus money across the max years are allowed, so you have the lower cap hit, which is also kind of against what Schoen has somewhat preached in this time. But I think he is preached one thing, but that was before he had the quarterback. If he has the quarterback and makes the decision to re-sign Jones, then honestly, at that point, he's saying, like, we need to just kind of do something with this cap. We can't just be in great cap health anymore. We have a $35 million quarterback on our roster. And ultimately, what you said about Barkley, one more interesting thing I want to touch on that. I actually think I still kind of think the Giants will re-sign Barkley, and I think they'll come closer to his number. And I've always kind of thought it'll be somewhere in between the 12 and the 16, like 14 million per year. And that's kind of what it will be. And that, I think, will happen after Barkley tests the market. So it's going to be an interesting offseason. I think he'll test the market. He'll get a big offer. It'll be about 15, 16 million a year. He'll bring it back to the Giants, and the Giants will say, all right, let's do 14. Stay with the Giants. This is where you want it to be, and let's go from there.
I think I would respect Barkley for that too, because Zeke makes 15, and you know Barkley and his agent are like, you got to make more than that freaking guy.
That's true.
At this point. And it's just like, oh, how do you weigh that situation if you're Saquon Barkley? Because you know he wants to be here in New York. Are you really going to not take extra money just because you want to stay in New York, especially if you go to one of those states that are tax-free on the income, which would be like, Florida, Texas, Nevada, Tennessee, wherever. But it is what it is, I guess.
And one thing to wrap up on the Jones thing that you brought up, or that's something you said a few minutes ago that caught my attention. I read recently, remember we had this whole discussion this offseason for the last couple of weeks, not just we, like any podcast talking about the NFL is like, oh, Lamar Jackson to the Jets. Ooh, Lamar Jackson to this. And then we've seen no, the Ravens are going to literally put the exclusive franchise tag on Lamar Jackson. Yeah. And that's, in my mind, basically what the Giants should do with Daniel Jones. And that under that tag, you pay him a little bit more, Jones, whatever it would be. But then if any team wants to re-sign Jones, you get 2 first-round picks back, I believe, if that team signs him, or the chance to match, I'm pretty sure. I don't know the full terms. I shouldn't have, maybe I should have looked it up, or riff in here. But I think it's something like that. You get either 1 or 2 first-round picks and the chance to match. And I agree with, some people are saying, like, we can't let Jones hit the market because Jones will get offers from these teams. That could be the case. I agree. Jones showed a lot of progress this year, so that makes sense. But then if you you put the exclusive franchise tag on him and those teams want to negotiate with Jones and they give him a big offer, well, now either you're getting 2 first-round picks back if you let him go or the chance to match whatever contract they give him. So that really puts the Giants in a good position. I really think ultimately if Joe Schoen's playing this perfect, he's going to put the tag on Daniel Jones. Now, for me, I would just let that tag ride out all year. Personally, I think the best course of action for this Giants franchise is to franchise tag Daniel Jones, exclusive franchise tag, and play the whole season out on that. It's a quarterback. It's not unheard of. Kirk Cousins had to do it for 2 years. It's possible. We've seen this happen before in the NFL. Not every quarterback gets the deal right away. Sometimes they have to prove themselves a little bit more. And I'd love to see a second season of Daniel Jones where they actually have some cap space. The only issue with that is, by the way, this is the problem with that, which is why they probably won't end up doing it maybe. If they do that, Nick, they probably have to figure out a way to table Lawrence, to table Thomas, to table Julian, because if you do that, there's no way to spread the cap hit. If you do the franchise tag out for the year, that's at 32, 33 million, whatever it is for this year against the cap.
The exclusive is 45.
There you go, 45. Maybe
that's a lot.
And maybe the Ravens ultimately just use that to negotiate with Lamar and come to a long-term deal where they can lower the cap hit. But let's say we did do the exclusive for Jones. That's $45 million against the cap next year. That's the issue with that.
Yeah, that's the exclusive. Now, the non-exclusive is 32.5.
Still a huge hit, though, for next year.
Yes, still a huge hit, but it's still a pretty substantial difference between the two.
But also when I hear about it like that, Nick, and I'm thinking about it now, I think that whole 2-year, 3-year out thing that we were hoping for or thinking about is kind of done. Like, I don't know how the Giants would ever pull that off because the only way to pull that off is by lowering the cap or is by not lowering the cap it for this year, right? Because then you have to kind of play it straight across the deal and have that 35, 35, 35, 35 or something like 33, 37, whatever it would be, to try to get out of that contract and pay most of it up front. And then you don't have the cap space if you're paying most of it up front to sign anyone this offseason or to sign your own or to build the guys that you supposedly need to build around Daniel Jones to make him a Super Bowl quarterback, the receivers, the offensive line, everything like that. So it's a very tricky spot.
It is a very tricky spot, and I'm really interested to see what Joe Schoen does. I think it will tell us a lot about what the path for this team is moving forward.
Yep. So thank you to everybody listening in today. Thought these were 2 interesting comments and reports from Paul Schwartz, who's done a really good job covering the Giants over the years. And more importantly, he's just really locked in. And I think he's really tuned in with his sources. So we'll see what happens. A lot more time to go here. The Giants obviously probably won't make any decisions on this until the new league year, or at least until the end of the Super Bowl. So keep it locked and loaded. We're going to have more content coming your way soon. Our next piece of content is going to be a review of the Giants 2023 draft class, or 2022, draft class. So we're going to go into Joe Schoen's first class with the idea that, look, this was some of the most capital probably ever have as GM of the Giants. This was a high capital draft. He had picks at 5 and 7, which are worth like thousands of points on the trade chart. So this was a draft that will set the tone for his entire tenure as a Giants GM, and will set the tone for this franchise moving forward. As we obviously know, you win through the draft. So there's a lot to discuss on on how that class looks after year 1 and how we think it will look moving forward. So keep it locked and loaded. We'll be there soon. But otherwise, have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk to you soon.